Okay. Um, so what I'm going to go through today is how to do this third step of these four drawings. This is the third one. So everybody that's here in class, I just want you to put your pencils down and just watch and pay attention for a minute, just so I know that you are listening to this. So what you guys, if you're at school, what you're going to do when you get to this third drawing, you're going to do it on 9 by 12 white, which is just the normal size white paper that's in your kit. If you're at school, I have extra paper if you need it. Um, so those of you that are in class, I have the bin with the forms in it. And so what you're going to do is you're going to select 3 forms out of that bin and you're going to set up a still life at your table. The only requirement is that one of the forms has to be rounded. So a minimum of one has to be either a sphere, a cone, or a cylinder. The other 2 can be whatever you want. If you want to challenge yourself, you could do more than one rounded shapes. The rounded, or forms, I should say. The rounded forms are a little bit more difficult. So I want you to have at least one of those in there. Um, those of you that are working from home, I have in Google Classroom, if you go into the assignment that I was just in, um, there are 2 reference photos. So I just basically set up 2 different still lifes that you can choose from, and you can load up a picture like the one I have here. Okay. Now, the way that you start drawing this is you want to start by getting your initial sketch of the objects. You want to draw them as large as you can while fitting them on your 9 by 12. Now, what I have for the students that are in class is I have this here is called a viewfinder. And the way that we use a viewfinder is you want to like line it up, you want to look through it and look at your still life, and you want to pretend that this hole on your viewfinder is your piece of paper, and you want to set up your composition so that it fits. Okay. So just as an example, let's say I was doing a still life of this pencil sharpener, right? So if I was looking through this viewfinder, you can see you can hold it up to your eyes. It's going to be kind of hard because I'm doing it through a camera here, but you want to try to line it up so it fits as big as it can. And then you pretend that's how it would fit on your paper. So you're going to do the same thing, but with the whole still life. And then what you do is you compare like how far away is it from the edge, how far is it away from the corner, and you can almost like mark reference points to draw. Okay, so that's how you use the viewfinder. Now I think for those of you at home, this image basically becomes your viewfinder. So your viewfinder is basically the edge of the photo, and you're going to pretend that this photo is your entire piece of paper, right? So I'm going to explain it in this video using this digital photo here, but for those of you doing it in person, pretend that this is your view through the viewfinder. This is what you guys are seeing. And I have viewfinders, they're up front on my big desk here that you can use today. So what I'm going to do is you want to start with your initial sketching, you want to use a hard pencil. So you want to use your H pencil, or if it's an HB pencil, but you want to use something that's a little bit harder of a pencil that's going to draw lighter. You want to save the softer pencils for doing your final work and your shading. You want to use the hard pencils for your initial sketching. So what I'm going to do here is pretending that this is my viewfinder, right? Maybe I'll start with the cube. You kind of want to estimate location-wise on this piece of paper because you're imagining this viewpoint here as your paper. You want to kind of try to pinpoint these locations. So if I'm looking at my paper, I'm going to move this here so I can see. So if you look at my cursor here, this is like probably about 3/4 of the way up the page, and it's got like, a decent sized gap like that. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. So if I'm looking at my paper, I'm going to guess that it's somewhere like in this range here. That's where I'm going to maybe just make like a little dot and say that's where that top corner of that's going to go. And then it goes down to roughly about the halfway point of my paper. So I'm going to estimate that that cube goes down to here. So now I've kind of plotted those 2 points. So just pick one form and then lightly sketch. So whichever form you think is going to be the easiest, I would start with that. Once you get the first form drawn on, then you kind of build it from there. So now I've got this first line in a pretty good location. I can kind of estimate this angle and kind of estimate the distance down to that point there. So what I'm looking at is this point here. I'm kind of thinking like if I'm dissecting this paper, it's probably about 1/3 of the way from the edge here. So once again, you're just eyeballing and kind of trying to figure that out. And then I would just mimic that angle here. And then I'm going to go vertical line here. And you can see I'm just being very loose and sketchy with it. And so then I'm just going to start to build the drawing out from there, trying to get the right angles in the right location. So now, once again, if I'm looking at this corner here, to me, this is literally like the halfway point. So you can see here on my paper, it's at about the midpoint of the page, so I know I'm pretty much in the right spot. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ignore the sphere, and I'm just going to draw this cube here, just as is, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish. And once again, this is just a loose, light sketch, okay? So I've got my cube drawn on there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the sphere on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the previous object as a reference point. So if I look, I can look at where it overlaps. So I can see I could almost make like a dot here, and then down here it's going to overlap about right here. So as I put my sphere on, I can kind of estimate that location, and I could almost maybe mark a spot and say, you know, the bottom of my sphere somewhere like around here. The side of the sphere might be here. The top might be here. So I've kind of made myself a bunch of like little boundaries. My lines are really light. You can see I've marked some points, so it's going to kind of cross here like that. So what I can do now is I'm just going to kind of use that loose circular motion, but I'm going to kind of go on those reference points. And now I've kind of pinpointed where that sphere is going to go. So then what I could do now is I could kind of go and darken up what I want my final edge to be. And then I could erase out the lines that don't matter. Okay, so I've got that sphere location on there pretty good. And then I can kind of erase some of that out to make that overlap. But you can see the key here is I've got this overlap really matching up with the overlap here, and you're using all your previous objects as a reference. Now that I have the sphere on, now I can mark where does the cone kind of pop out. Because one of the requirements for this, I should have mentioned it. So those of you at home, I've got all the requirements in the images already, so you just pick one of the two images. But for those of you here, the other requirement, other than choosing one rounded form, is your forms have to overlap each other. And that's actually going to help you out. It's going to be a benefit. But one reason I want the overlap is I want to see like the cast shadows covering each other. And then you have the references of them overlapping each other to kind of help you out. So now I'm going to mark that the triangle kind of, or the not the triangle, but the cylinder, kind of not cylinder, the cone kind of goes right here, right? And so I can also look at like the gap here and see that on mine, you know, I'm going to have roughly a similar size gap here relative to that. So once I've kind of marked that, I can kind of go here, estimate about how far from the top of the page it should go. Okay, and it's kind of like really skinny at the top, and then I'm going to kind of round that off and just bring it back down. Now, I could actually skip down here, and I see that there's a reference point here where it crosses over, so I'm going to kind of get that little curve in there, and then I can go and kind of bring that back up, and then roughly get that in there. Okay, so now I've got my three forms on there, and then you kind of work from there, but that's how you do the initial sketching. And then once you get in, then you're going to start kind of doing the shading. Now, what I recommend you can do, now in this picture here, there's like a line here for where the desk is. What I would say for the background, you don't really have to follow the background exactly, but what I recommend you do is maybe just make a horizontal line somewhere above the form, just so that you have like a reference for like the background and like the surface it's sitting on. You do want to have a surface it's sitting on because you do need to draw these cast shadows. So what I could do is I could kind of sketch an outline maybe of where the cast shadows are going to go, or I could kind of do that later on. But you can see the cast shadows are actually very complex. You can see there's multiple overlappings down here. It gets really dark and then a little bit lighter and then a little bit lighter. So this is really good for practicing values. You'll see that there's like a cast shadow over here, things like that, right? So now I'd go into my soft pencil when I maybe want to start my shading. And like I said, our lighting situation here isn't as good as I would like. So it's okay to emphasize the values and tints as you go through. So you can make areas darker maybe than what they actually appear to emphasize it a little bit, and kind of change it. So when I'm looking at this, on this picture here, I would say that right here, the right and the left side both look very similar. But what I'm going to say is, as you can see, like here, this cast shadow is really moving to the right. So I'm going to say that my right side is the darkest, and I'm going to make this left side a little bit lighter, but still really dark, and the top is going to be really, really light. So what I might do is, as I'm shading this here, and you can use, so from step 2 where you practiced 6 different ways to shade, you can use any type of shading from that list. So if you want to do stippling on this, you can. If you want to do the hatching or cross hatching, you can. If you pick one of the ones that a pen works for, you could do this part with a pen. That's up to you. I'm just going to do like a blended for mine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this very, very dark. And I'm going to really define those edges now with this. And I could maybe even go darker if I want to. But I'm not going to sit and shade this whole thing. I'm just going to do a couple of them just to give you an idea. But then what I could do is I could take my blending stub, and if I'm doing a blended version, then I could start to like smooth this out a little bit and get that really nice and dark. Okay. Now what's going to happen on the next side here, sorry, that smeared a little bit. That's the thing when you use the softer pencils, it does smear really easily, which is a good and a bad thing. So then what I would do is on this side, I'm going to make it just a little bit lighter. It's still going to be fairly dark, but I'm going to make it a little bit lighter than what I had here. but still going to be fairly dark. But the part I want you to notice here is that the sphere is casting like an additional shadow over it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically do this in layers. So I'm going to kind of do the value that I feel is appropriate for the whole thing. And then I might blend that in. And once again, this side should look a little bit lighter than the other side. And notice how I'm rotating my paper a lot. When you're doing drawing and shading, you want to rotate it in a way so that you're comfortable while you're doing it. Okay? So I'm going to do something like this. Now what you're going to see here is that there's like a darker cast shadow here from the sphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of mark that in. And we can just layer more shadows on top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer over a darker cast shadow here and kind of get that in so that we can see that. So you can see now I've got that darker cast shadow there. Okay, same thing like down here, you would want to do all the values on the cast shadow and things as well. Now, what you've got here for like in the background, you can see the top part is basically pure white, right? But we really don't want to have like this pencil line showing. So what you want to avoid when you're drawing realistically is you want to avoid like really strong outlines because then it looks more cartoony. When you're doing it realistically, you let the values determine the lines or kind of define where the lines would be. So what I'm going to show you is you might have to shade the background a little bit. So up here, rather than just having my pencil line, like I'll have my pencil line there as a guide, but then what I might do is back here, I might just decide to invent and just make up like a light value in the background. And you don't have to like shade it all the way out, but what I could do is I could just go a little bit and then like just have it kind of fade. So let me just do something like this and then I might just have it fade out. Okay, because if you give the background some attention, it's going to make your drawing look a little bit better. But then what I can do now is I can take my blending stub out here and then just bring these values out a little bit. So just give me a second here. So the way you would make this white edge like not just disappear is you just put some shading in the background, and then you would probably want to continue the value all the way along it so it's consistent. But now I could take this and I could really erase out where it's really, really white here. Okay, something like that. Okay, and now you can see that I've like defined that, but now I'm not just seeing like the pencil line there. So I would say that cube is pretty done, other than I haven't done the cast shadow yet, but I don't want this video to go on forever. So, but basically if you follow that method and then just keep doing the shading, you should be good to go. And so the idea for this drawing is I want it fully shaded. I want it as realistic as possible. I want the forms to look three-dimensional. And then this should just be a fully shaded pencil drawing. Like I said, there needs to be cast shadow and probably some shading in the background, especially if you're defining like something really light there. Okay, so that's basically it for that. So let me turn off the recording and then I'll ask for questions here. So let me just stop this.